Good morning. We are so pleased to have you here with us today as we launch our 7th month of Business Over Breakfast with Emory Executive Education at Goizueta Business School. I'm Ashley Johnston, Director of Business Development at Emory Executive Education. For those of you not familiar with us, we seek to understand the business challenges you're facing and deliver the learning and tools to help you successfully meet those challenges. Our goal is that the graduates of our executive education programs are better prepared to affect change and lead organizations of the future. As I mentioned, we're entering our 7th month of the series. We first launched Business Over Breakfast back in April to be a source of information and ideas during uncertain times. Our October series of Business Over Breakfast will focus on embracing change in the new normal. We'll kick things off today with a look at the economy, followed by a look at new technologies and how to leverage them in your business next week, then how to navigate change and inspire those around you to initiate change, and then how to pivot your business model quickly to match the rapid shifts in the market. You may know our guide for today's webinar, Tom Smith, professor in the practice of finance, from his appearances on CNN, NPR, and Huffington Post. For those of you who've joined us before, you know Tom's an expert in the areas of labor economics, pricing, sports economics and finance, the economics of the entertainment industry, the economics of the healthcare industry, and film finance. Basically a jack of all trades when it comes to finance. He also teaches in some of our upcoming courses, including personal financial fitness workshops starting tomorrow, October 2nd, and finance and accounting for non-financial managers in December. Tom will spend around 30 minutes focused on economic news and what it means for you, followed by about 30 minutes of Q&A time. Please know you can write your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen anytime, and our team will do their best to get to as many of your questions today as we can. At the end of today's session, there'll be a very short 5-question survey that we would appreciate you filling in. Enjoy the morning with Tom, and I look forward to continuing the conversation around embracing change in the new normal in October. Tom?
Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate that. Yeah, I was just thinking about that this morning. I think I came on to do one of the first of these seminars or first of these programs, and that was many, many months ago, right back in March or April. So let me just make sure, because it looks like you all froze. I'm wondering if I froze instead of you all froze.
You're good, Tom. We see you.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. All right. It's you know what? We're all getting way too used to Zoom. We're probably all getting way too tired of how this technology works, and also what it means in terms of like our work-life balance. It's pretty crazy that it just, instead of saying like, oh, I'm gonna work from home today, it's like I'm just working today. So, all right. Let me talk about some things in the economy. And let me go to my screen here. So let me just jump right into this. So Chris Wallace, if you guys had watched the debate, boxing match, whatever you want to call it, the other night, Chris Wallace actually asked this question to President and Vice President about the shape of the recovery. And he said, the President thinks it's a V shape and Biden thinks it's a K shape. Like, what's going on? And, I think that early on I had been talking about this recovery being something like a sawtooth or looking like the front of Charlie Brown's sweater or something like this. But I think that most economists right now have settled on this K shape as being what's going on with economic recovery. A lot of people are talking about sort of this V shape. We've had very few economic recoveries that are like a V, that is a very, very steep change in either GDP or unemployment, and then that change recovers after a very short period of time. The truth is that most recoveries last a long time, and parts of the economy kind of flounder for months, maybe even years, right? So the 2001 recession, for example, which was relatively mild, only lasted officially 9 months, was a jobless recovery, and we didn't have jobs come back to the level pre-recession for about 2.5 years, 3 years. So very, very kind of long, drawn out recession. Even though the recession was actually very, very short, the recovery part of it was not even. So when people are talking about this K-shaped recovery, I've just diagrammed it here for you. I mean, this huge drop in GDP, but you could also think about this as a huge drop in, let's say, your income or productivity, number of people employed. This just a giant, the economy just stopped, bam, right in mid-March, beginning of April with the full shutdowns, right? And then and we saw huge drops in the S&P and the Dow Jones and what have you. Just blam, we came off of a cliff. So that's this downward part of the K. And since then, we've had a divergence in recoveries and gains relative to some losses. So this green, the upward sloping part of the K here, we've got gains for some groups, higher educated, white, males, professionals. If you have wealth, if you had money that you could throw into the market, you could buy the dip, and people have had 25%, 35%, 45% returns, since the dip. And I mean, if you pick the right stocks, like you are doing very well, right? Plus, depending on how your household is set up, maybe you've been able to save substantially on your car insurance, car payments, all types of ancillary things that you would have spent being a professional, right? Dry cleaning and things of this nature. And so for these groups, I don't think the economic recession looks that bad. They say, you know what, I'm getting along. I still have a job. I'm paying all my bills. I saw a 5 or 10% cut in my pay, but I've been able to compensate by cutting my expenses. I'm not sending my kids to soccer practice, or we don't have piano lessons. I don't have 2 cars to fill up with gas, what have you. And so you've been able to, compensate your losses with savings in some way, shape, or form. And then there's the other group, this red, the other part of the K, the one that goes down. These are groups that lost their jobs, haven't been able to find real employment since they were furloughed. Maybe they came back in some partial employment. So they were working 40 hours a week. They'd come back to 15 hours a week. They're making $18 an hour. Now they're making 12, or now they're on unemployment semi-permanently. And you were talking about lower educated women, Black, Hispanic, usually non-professionals who are finding it very, very difficult, especially now that a lot of these safety nets, the packages that the Congress had put together, like the CARES Act, these have expired, and we don't have the additional unemployment insurance benefits, or what we do have is very sporadic, and it differs from state to state to state. And so you're looking at this and saying, wow, so there are groups that are suffering quite significantly, people who are losing their apartments. There's no longer any kind of safety net with respect to rent, holidays or eviction moratoriums or anything like this. And so people who kind of fell into this second bucket have suffered considerably and are continuing to suffer. And if you look at this group, or you listen to this group, you talk to this group, they say, this is awful. This is the worst recession we've ever had. And then you have another group that says, it hasn't been that bad. I mean, I still have a job, during 2008, we lost everything. There were a ton of banks that were going under, and now it's just, I took a 7% pay cut, but I only have 1 car to fill up with gas, and instead of twice a week, it's twice a month. So you've got this real divergence with respect to who has suffered and who hasn't suffered, and I think that's it needs to be made clear. A lot of people who are talking about the K shape, it's kind of fun to say, and it's an interesting way to think about the economy, but people aren't sort of stepping back and saying, so what does that mean? And so that's what's going on with the K-shaped recovery. Okay. So the economy is gaining. We're going to see some new unemployment numbers tomorrow. We saw the unemployment fall from 11% down to sort of upper 9s. Now it's lower 8s. Some economists are suggesting that if you follow that trend, we might be somewhere between, let's say, 7.5% and 8% unemployed. sort of depends on how it is that the BLS is classifying some workers who have been temporarily absent from work due to illness and or furloughs. And so the BLS, um, in their monthly reports, continue to have a section of notes that say that the survey wasn't really put together for a pandemic. The kind of questions that they're asking that would classify people as being employed versus not employed, really not adequate to decipher all of the nuances that are going on in our current labor market situation. That said, the official unemployment rate tomorrow might come out at 7.8%. I've been off so many times. Um, I'm starting to like trying to figure out what this trend looks like and who's employed and who isn't employed. One of the numbers that just continues to just drag on is this initial unemployment claims. The new initial unemployment claims for the previous week is coming out every Thursday. So this just came out. Another 837,000 workers are claiming initial unemployment claims. It's just at some point this is going to catch up to us. We cannot have close to 1 million people every week filing new unemployment claims and not have it be a drag on our economy. I just heard recently, yesterday and the day before, about all of these job losses. Just look at the companies where we're having job losses. It's startling and kind of upsetting. You've got Disney just announced, 2 days ago, that they're going to lay off 28,000 workers. Okay, Coca-Cola in the last month said they're going to eliminate 4,000 workers. American Airlines, 19,000. United Airlines, 13,000. Delta, almost 2,000 pilots. Right? This is not, I don't like to hear that, especially when it comes to our hometown companies. So, I know I've taught people who either work for Delta, are supported by Delta, have spouses or, significant others who are pilots who have rely on Delta for, their livelihood. And I hate to see, hometown airlines suffering as much as it is. You got Shell. We've had, huge impacts on our energy sector. It didn't help that we had Russia and some other countries that were kind of fighting over who could pump more oil and drop the prices as quickly as they can. And so Shell Oil, we've got oil service company Schlumberger. They fired 21,000 workers. Shell is cutting it by 9,000 jobs. Raytheon. I mean, these are we've got some offices here for Raytheon and some other offices for some other defense companies in town, because we've got the Air Force bases and we've got other elements here in town that are significant to defense, and they're cutting 15,000 jobs. It is just startling to see the number of companies that are publishing, 5-digit job cuts and furloughs, right? And even the companies that are saying they're not furloughs, they're still job cuts. They're saying, oh, we're like Ford, we've approached between 5,000 and 10,000 employees and asked them to voluntarily retire. Well, if Ford is approaching you and saying, I would like you to voluntarily retire, that's not really a volunteer retirement, right? As much as they say that it is, it's not. And so, that's the kind of stuff that makes me very nervous. Not only because I own a Ford and I want that company to stay in business, but because those are real jobs. This is real people's livelihood. So, and then you've got, 11% cuts by Guggenheim Museum. Kohl's is cutting 15%. And then you add on top of this, all the companies that are just absolutely done going out of business. So your Steinmarts, your Victoria's Secrets, Limited Express. These companies are all just closing. Like, we're done. We're not going to have any retail shops anymore. So that's very very troubling. It's a very, very troubling trend. So that's what's going on there. Some companies are hiring, and I do like to see this. Home Depot, again, one of our hometown companies here, they're hiring. Amazon is hiring. Bed Bath & Beyond, Encompass, Chipotle. Chipotle made an announcement that they're hiring a bunch of people. Staples, right? It's, They're selling lots of computers, lots of printers, lots of people working at home. They certainly need those supplies, what have you. So you say, well, that's fine. Like, so, you lose your job at United Airlines or Delta and you get a job at Amazon or Home Depot or Chipotle. That's not a problem. Yeah, except for you lose a job as a pilot and you go to work at Bed Bath and Beyond. And that's not apples to apples, right? That's apples to crab apples. Okay. Nothing wrong with Bed Bath and Beyond. It's a fine company, but the relative pay and the number of hours that you're getting being a Delta pilot and then going on to work at Chipotle or something, these are not going to be comparable. And so the jobs that we're gaining are not necessarily the same as the jobs that we're losing. And so that's going to have a significant drag on our economy. Okay. We had this executive order. I talked about this last time. The executive order was to add initially $400 and then $300 to the unemployment insurance weekly, and then the states actually had to find the money to do this using some FEMA resources. The states had to renegotiate their own systems to make sure that they could get this money to people. People were only eligible if they had previously received over $1,000 in unemployment insurance. And so this was not an unlimited pile of cash that President Trump was counting on. This came from sort of emergency reserves. And these are all the states that have already said they're done with that program. They do not have the money anymore. Texas, Florida, Arizona, Alabama, Georgia, right here, right? Montana, North Carolina. And so, I mean, we got 15 states here that have all said, we're done. We don't have any more money. So that program lasted a month, 7 weeks, certainly not enough to support to provide the resources that unemployed persons really need. Okay. Now, the good news is that Steve Mnuchin and Nancy Pelosi are meeting and they're working on a new stimulus package. From everything I've heard from people who work in the industry, Steve Mnuchin is a very practical person. He may be fiscally conservative, but he's a realist and he knows that things need to get done. And so he's a doer. That's from people who have worked with him, who have engaged with him in private industry in years past. They're like, and he just tries to get things done. So I am optimistic that they're going to find something that the president is likely to sign on to. If Steve Mnuchin can actually come up with a program that he thinks has some kind of teeth with respect to getting the economy kind of on some even footing, but also isn't going to break the bank, if you will, even though the bank has already been broken. I'm definitely optimistic that they're going to come up with something. It's not clear if this is something that the Senate can grab onto. I have just no crystal ball when it comes to what the Senate is trying to do or not trying to do. And so everything might be on hold until, we get a Supreme Court nomination that's on its way to a vote. And so I don't know if there's going to be any kind of fiscal relief here. The country desperately needs it. If you look at, half a dozen to a dozen different academic publications in the last month or two, they all pointed to the fact that the CARES Act and the extra $600 per week unemployment insurance, safety net, stimulus, what have you, probably saved the economy from going into a complete disaster. That is, by providing additional resources for people were going out and spending money in the economy. And so people who didn't have money then all of a sudden had money and, they spent it. So it definitely propped up the economy, but there's all the evidence suggests that that's true. The lack of a fiscal stimulus means that we could have, let's say, not as robust growth coming out of the summer into the fall as we might have had otherwise. So it's a little bit challenging to think about think about that. I did want to point out here, I had started this analysis here. This morning, I was just looking at, let's say, unemployment rates, because we know the unemployment rate is going to come out tomorrow. And, I think it's going to be somewhere between 7.5 and 8.5, the official unemployment rate, U3. But the unemployment rate for different groups is significantly different, right? This graph I just grabbed from the Fed. This is 6 different series. So it's the 20 and over, from white men and white women to Hispanic men and women to Black and African American men and women. And you can see that white men have the lowest unemployment rate. And so the unemployment rate for white men is about 7%. For white women, it's about 7.3%. But you look at this and say, like, wow, so Black African American women, it's 12.5%, or African American males, it's 13%, or Hispanic women, it's almost 11%. There is a huge divergence between these groups. And I mean, you could splice and dice this in terms of education, in terms of professional status, types of jobs. And the truth is that it's like, really, some groups are making some recoveries while other groups are not recovering as quickly. And I think that's the whole tenor of what this K-shape means. I know people have a lot of questions, so I'm happy to start taking some questions right now. Maybe we can discover some things together.
Yeah, sure, Tom. Okay, well, so not surprising, our first question here coming in, it says there was some talk about the differences between economic plans between Biden and Trump. Any thoughts about which is more likely to help our economy and create more jobs, or is that a topic for a whole other topic talk?
It's really, really challenging, because everybody wants to say, well, in the past recessions, or in the past, this is what's happened. This is what we're likely to see when we come out of a recession with respect to, let's say, a Democratic president versus a Republican president. The only problem of sort of drawing comparisons is that every recession is a little bit different. And we had a couple oil embargo recessions in the mid to late 70s, right? There's one around the Yom Kippur Wars in 74, and then another, the Iran oil crisis with the fall of the Shah of Iran in 79, that were similar to each other. But since then, we've had a number of recessions that have all taken on a sort of a slightly different flavor, that has started because of a different reason. And as a result, the cure for those recessions are not as simple as just saying, well, here's one policy for Republicans versus another policy for Democrats. I think if you get a new president with a new Senate, and they, let's say, cut the filibuster rules so that you don't need 60 people to approve of a plan, then, by the end of January, beginning of February, you probably have something like a $3 trillion, $5 trillion fiscal stimulus that covers everything from bailing out the auto industry, bailing out the airline industry, to bailing out, individual companies like a Disney or something like this. If you get a Republican, so if Trump wins, but you get a Democrat Senate, then are they going to try to punish Trump? Are they going to try to come up with their own plan, see if they can find some kind of a middle ground? Versus if you get a Republican president and a Republican Senate again, will they be able to agree on the best path forward? We've got a couple different variables here, right? Who's president, what the Senate looks like, and then what they're trying to prove coming out of the elections. I think that the policies that people are putting forward, President Trump versus Vice President Biden, really focus on, at least from what I can tell, whether you're going to give more tax cuts or more fiscal relief, like direct payments, so changing the unemployment insurance program, or giving cash to individual families. Which families you give cash to? Do you cut taxes for some groups and then increase taxes for other groups? I mean, the truth is that there's multiple variables and multiple switches that you could change and or flip, and you'd get a slightly different outcome. Unfortunately, there isn't a great way to evaluate each policy because there's, you know, multiple unknowns. Who's the president? Who's going to be the chair of the Senate? Who's going to be the president of the Senate? Right? Is it Mitch? Is it Chuck? So I'm sorry, my crystal ball is not working well enough for me to tell you how that's going to turn out. Are there other questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as the impact of, what's the impact of COVID in regards to the healthcare sector?
So I think it's coming back a little bit. I know that I've saw that I've got some of my MBA students, and I've got some people who work in the healthcare sector. So the beginning of this pandemic, what was happening is that a lot of resources inside of hospitals and healthcare units were being diverted away from, let's say, elective surgeries or other types of healthcare coverage to just making sure that people who had COVID were taken care of, that people were being kept alive. I've seen quite a bit of then moving back to the norm where you've got, okay, now we can have elective surgeries. Now we've got people who are being put back into where they were working before. I don't think it's been placed back to where it was, let's say last February or last January, 100%. I know some healthcare systems are working really hard to make sure that the units that were in place before are as operational as they were. Some people are still in transition, still helping out sort of COVID patients and what have you. So the healthcare workers that I have been talking to, quite a few of my students, they're just terrific people. God bless them. I mean, they're doing really great work out there. And they've said that things are starting to get back to normal. One internal specialist that I talked to yesterday said that they were maybe back to 70% of where they were last January, heading towards 80%. The number of procedures are definitely picking up, but people are still being very, very, very cautious. In terms of like making sure that they're masked up, making sure that they're social distancing, it makes some of their jobs very, very difficult. But I think that they're moving back to where they were, but it is not there 100%. So nobody I've talked to has said, yep, we're exactly where we were last January. It's somewhere maybe between 70 and maybe 80, 85%, but they're getting there. I think that could change again if you get a combination of a nasty winter flu with a COVID problem. So you could get a resurgence. I know that the CDC, Fauci, some other healthcare professionals in that sector have said that this could be a very nasty couple of months. I know that some universities, including Emory, are considering when to restart classes because they want to try to avoid as much of the flu season as possible. And so I don't know when Emory is going to restart, but I do know that they're evaluating this. They're trying to figure out how to match up what students coming back to campus perhaps, but trying to avoid, let's say, the major part of the flu season. So I think that it's had a tremendous negative impact. I think it's getting back to normal, but I do not believe it's at 100%. I'm sure we've got healthcare workers that are listening right now who will say, yeah, it's like 87%, or it's 79%, or it's 83%, or yeah, we're almost back to full capacity. Maybe we're at 90%. But I haven't heard from a lot of people who are saying, yeah, we're exactly where we were last January.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
So recognizing the commercial real estate market will be bruised by the COVID shutdown and the shift to work from home environments, what impact will the shutdown have on residential real estate market?
Yeah, so I actually spent quite a bit of time with my colleague Bill. He thinks he's driving to New Orleans. How you doing, Bill? I hope you're doing well. Be safe, man. It's I know New Orleans has been shut down. And so me and my colleague, we looked at this and very recently, and so there were a couple interesting things that happened. One of them is that the inventory during the summer just was not the same as what we saw in previous summers, but the time to close on a house was actually shorter. So there were fewer houses on the market, but they got pulled off the market. They rolled off the market a little bit quicker. But there were also substantially fewer price cuts. So not as many houses had as deep of price cuts. But the average price of a house remained almost perfectly constant. And so you say, like, so how does that happen? So I think instead of maybe a typical person says, oh, I'm going to list my house at 510 or 519 or whatever else, and maybe I'll sell it for 499. Like, I'll take a little bit of a cut. Instead of that, people just said, like, okay, let's list it for 499, and then they sold it for 499. And so they got the same price, but they didn't go through the same negotiations to get there, and not as many houses went on the market. So people who said, I just don't think that my house is going to sell, I haven't done the fixing up that I'd like to, or I haven't done the repainting or the re-siding or what have you, they didn't put their house on the market. My neighbors who were thinking about it, and I have two neighbors, one of them who said, look, my house is in great condition. I know I can't get what I want, but I think this is a fair price. They listed it at that price and they sold it for that price in about 7 days. And then the neighbor across the street said, okay, my house just isn't in shape. I have too much work to do. My house is going to sit there. So they said, I'm not going to put my house in the market maybe until next spring, maybe next summer. He's like, we don't have to move. We can continue to work from here. And so they're not moving. So I think there's a slightly different tenor with respect to the real estate market. Now, that's considerably different than what we're seeing in, let's say, the commercial real estate market, which is taking a pummeling. And so I know I've mentioned this a couple of times, but I'll mention it again. You've got people who own, let's say, commercial space, and you've got people who are leasing that space. Your credit tenants, so your Starbucks, your the companies that are there, Jimmy John's, what have you. Now, these are fine companies, so I'm not trying to point them out as in terms of what they're trying to do. But from what I've heard, all the credit tenants are renegotiating their leases, so their lease terms. So they're saying, you know what, we're supposed to have a lease term for 2 years or whatever else, and this is how much we're going to pay. We're not going to pay that anymore. Now we want a credit for the last year going back to February. We're not going to make any payments going forward all the way through next February. And then after that, this is what we want our lease to be. And as the owner of that property, that commercial property, if you say, forget it, like you've signed an agreement, then they're saying, fine, talk to our lawyers. Like, we're going to claim, act of God clause. And then it's going to be 2 years before this thing litigates itself out and you actually get us out of your property. In the meantime, you're not collecting rent. So do you want to go down the path of least resistance, where you accept the fact that things have changed and you're going to receive lower payments, or do you want to battle it out in court? By the way, the courts, they're up to their eyeballs in other types of issues. So I think that people who are owning commercial real estate are realizing that they have to negotiate, they have to play ball with their tenants to try to get the best scenarios going forward. But I know that just by talking to somebody in real estate last week, that quite a few tenants just, here's the keys, and just walked away. They said, hey, you still have a 2-year lease. Like, okay, sue me. Like, you're not going to get any money. You can't squeeze blood from a stone. So they just walked away, and now they've got empty property, and they're not likely to fill that property until we've got some kind of a pharmaceutical solution for COVID. So this is first and foremost, the COVID recession. So the economic shock is COVID. It is laying bare, like, problems in the real estate market that cannot be fixed until you address that issue. And so I think that residential, I'm sure that there have been real estate agents who said, look, this has just been fine for me. I haven't seen a real big dip. Instead of having 20 listings and, a bunch of them sort of sitting around for months and months and months, I've got fewer listings, but they're all going quicker. I've heard that from a number of real estate professionals, but from all of my commercial real estate friends, developers, they're having a hard time, and it's going to continue to be a hard time. And I do believe that coming out of this, a large number of companies, whether it's 50%, 60%, maybe it's 35%, are going to reevaluate whether or not they actually need office space. And they're just going to say, we just don't need it. I mean, I talked to somebody who had a $10,000 a month space and said, you know what, we're just never going to go back to that again. So we bought out of the lease. We're never going to go back to that kind of space. We don't need it. We've been working okay remotely. We'll get together quarterly or twice a quarter, at some conference room, at the Holiday Inn or what have you, and we'll work some things out, and then boom, that's it. We just do not need to be spending the money on that space. We'll spend the money on something else. I mean, that's frightening if you're in that industry, to think about the fact that a bunch of companies are just never going to go back to doing business the way they did before. So I think there's been a divergence, and it's commercial real estate is going to change for a long time, maybe the next 7-8 years.
All right, thanks, Tom.
Mhm.
Any views about the recovery time for smaller businesses, and will we go through a fundamental shift in retail and food business?
Yeah, we're already going through a huge shift in retail and food business. So, one of my students is, works pretty heavily in the retail food space. He does some concept stuff, just a really creative guy. I just love my MBA students. They're super smart. And he's saying, look, like what people want and what people are going to get are going to be two different things. And so the idea of being able to have a restaurant where you've got, a bunch of table service, he's not seeing that's something that can be accomplished in the short run. So, so companies that can offer, good food at a good price that remains hot, is close enough to where you live that you can get it in 20 minutes. Those are the companies that are going to be successful. If you're really relying on, people coming to your restaurant, sitting down, and you need that kind of churn to make it work for your company, he says that's just not a viable model for, let's say, the next year and a half. In terms of retail, well, you said small business. So it depends on the kind of small business you're in. If you're in like small retail, like shopping, boutique shops, or whatever else, and you relied on having a lot of foot traffic, now you're in trouble, right? I mean, you just rethinking your whole business model and saying, I'm going to go over to Etsy or something. Okay. Malls are dead. Malls were in trouble before this pandemic. Malls are now in trouble forever. People are going to rethink about whether or not they actually want to go to malls. And so malls are dead. Malls were dying. Now they're dead. I'm sure people will say like, no, like these can come back. Maybe, but I'm not seeing it. Smaller businesses, depends on what it is that you're doing. I know there's lots of small businesses that are really trying to make things work, but every small business that I've worked with, my wife has a small business. She's in HR. She works with small businesses to help them hire people, come up with, COVID policies, reopening policies, and whatever else. Every single one of these businesses that she's working with is reconstituted their workforce, and it's smaller. So if they had 20 people, now they're working with 12. They had 100 people, now they're working with 70. They had 60 people, now they're working with 40. Every single one, right? And there's no businesses that are saying, you know what, we were at 100, we want to go back up to 120. That's just not happening. They're thinking, how do I run sleeker? How do I run with fewer employees to make things work? And it's depends on the sector that the business is in, and whether or not you're going to be able to successfully navigate the next, let's say, 6 months, but it could be as long as 9 months before we have some kind of a pharmaceutical solution. So I think that small businesses depends on what it is you do and how lean you're willing to operate your business. I'm sure there's lots of great entrepreneurs out there who are willing to run their business incredibly lean. And these people are able to make things work, but they're running lean.
Yeah, great. Thanks for touching on that, Tom. I guess diving into another industry, there was a question just around the thoughts of the economic impact in the arts and entertainment industry, and I'd add on that sports because you're our sports guy.
Sure. Yeah. So we can talk about sports. So I did not think that baseball was going to last more than a week. I mean, within the first week, we had the Cardinals, the Marlins went down, and the Marlins beat my Cubs yesterday. They had a really great, like seventh inning, and so I think the Cubs are in trouble. We're not hitting above the Mendoza line. It's not good. So, but other than that, I mean, baseball hasn't had some really big issues, and baseball isn't playing in a bubble. The NBA, when they went to the bubble, it turned out to be just a really great way for them to contain the athletes, contain the employees, and produce some decent basketball. I know hockey did the same thing, and it's worked out pretty well for them. I know that football is having some issues. You're talking about a 53-person squad with almost as many coaches. So you're talking about 100 and some people traveling with a football team. It is much more difficult to, let's say, navigate that many people. For baseball, I mean, you're talking about 25, 29-man roster with an additional dozen coaches or something. So you're talking about 50 people. Well, now, I mean, you double that and then some for your football teams. That's a lot of people to keep track of. It's a lot of people to keep safe. And I know that two games were canceled this last weekend or coming up because of some COVID positive tests. The NFL, which has always been about protecting the shield, I think is doing a pretty good job about penalizing teams where coaches didn't wear masks, where they didn't seem to be following the rules. So I think that football is throwing down the hammer pretty hard when it comes to making sure that their teams are actually following the guidelines to keep people safe. That said, we're already having some teams that look like there's a bunch of positives on there. I don't know if football can work out as well as baseball did, right? So I would be surprised if I wouldn't be surprised if in 2 or 3 weeks you have a handful of games that are just canceled because a third of the team is tested positive. I mean, there's no way you can social distance. I mean, not if you're a good football player. If you're a good football player, you're definitely not social distancing. You're right on top of the other person. So, if a team ends up being positive, like the other team, whoever you're playing against, they're going to end up being positive as well, right? Blood, sweat, and tears being shared between these players. So I'm not as optimistic about football. And that also scares me a little bit about, NCAA football. I know that a lot of leagues, there were a couple divisions, 10 wasn't going to play, then they came back a little bit, and they're doing sort of like all conference, and the other leagues are doing all conference as well. And there has been a very challenging trend with respect to college towns and getting college students back on campus. Pretty much across the board, it has not been a success getting college students to behave, to social distance, to wear masks, to not party and interact. I'm sure I'm talking to a whole bunch of people who went to college and said, oh, yeah, that was great. College was terrific, and we got together all the time. Yeah. And so, I mean, college students it's tough. It's in their genetics to go out and socialize and party and interact. That's where their brains are at, So I know colleges have not been successful getting kids back on campus and keeping them safe, right? So just all of the major outbreaks right now, or a majority of them, are taking place in college towns. It's just been awful. And you've heard about UNC and some other schools like that. So I am fearful that these college football programs are going to suffer the same fate that the college towns have suffered and that the college campuses have suffered, and that is once one person gets it, everybody gets it. With respect to like arts and entertainment, this is not good. So I didn't include on that list of people who are firing people. So NBC, Cast Universal fired a bunch of people. Creative arts, they fired a huge number of people, and people who are in the industry are really suffering. So I saw this like 15-minute clip on YouTube about it's a bunch of comedians in LA and Vegas who just don't have any way of making money. I'm just like, there's no comedy clubs. Comedian was, and I'm just a broke comedian. I'm living in a house I've been foreclosed on, and you're gonna have to drag me out of here, but it might be any minute. That's terrible. I feel for these people. So, for as much as their lives depend on live music and live performances, they are suffering because there aren't live performances and there isn't live music, and it's not likely to happen anytime in the near future. And so that industry is going to suffer significantly. I know that some artists have gone into the studio and produced some good stuff. Taylor Swift came out with a new album, Billie Eilish came out with some cool songs, but by and large, like, these people are going to suffer because they can't go on tour. Like, that's how you sell your records. You go on tour to promote your album. Well, you can't go on tour to promote your album, and your album's not going to do very well. So I think it's in bad shape. How many bads was that? Like 7? It's probably worse than that.
Thanks, Tom. We have a question from our chat. Is it better for the government to determine the winners and losers coming out of this pandemic? In other words, why is it better for airlines to receive bailouts while Main Street businesses suffer?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate that question, and I'm sure you're listening to me, and I'm saying, oh, we should bail out this. In 2008, we bailed out banks, and over here it's so. The truth is that you've got lobbyists and you've got people who have political influence who are able to negotiate their way into some kind of a fiscal stimulus package and say we're more important than other people, right? So I think it would be it would be naive of us to not to acknowledge that some groups, let's say, an airline lobby, right, or a automobile manufacturing lobbyist, don't have more political influence than other groups and are able to get what it is that they want, which is, like a huge bailout package, right? So I don't think that it's the right thing to do. It is what's going to happen, but I don't pretend that it's better to bail out the airline industry than it is to bail out a bunch of small businesses. I mean, the truth is that most people are employed by small companies. It's just true. And so I think that there needs to be a significant amount of stimulus, additional stimulus for small businesses. The problem is that small businesses are not organized in such a way that they can, so like there's a million of them and they all have a different idea and a different agenda, and they're all in different sectors and they're all providing different goods and services. So they can't get together as a lobby with one group, send that person or a handful of people up to DC and say, we demand this type of package. We want this kind of a bailout, because they're diverse. They're all over the place, all over the country. They kind of services in different kind of sectors. And so if you don't have a singular focus, it's almost impossible for a lobbyist to present what your mission and your goal is. This is different than the airline industry, which can hire a lobby group and say, look, everybody knows what the airline industry is. You fly person from point A to point B, you're on vacation or you're on a job. And so if you're on a job and you need to fly across the country, you need to do it. And so we can't have the economy work without the airline industry, right? A bunch of politicians say, yes, of course. Okay, so this is the stimulus that we need. This is the package that it should be. Just because they're singularly focused, they can present a uniform message that you can get a bunch of people who can sign off on it, all agree. Yes, this is an important industry, okay? I think that it is often misunderstood about sort of how governments can help um, flailing economy, and fiscal stimulus is an incredibly powerful and incredibly useful set of tools. That's what we have at our disposal. So tax cuts, subsidies, guaranteed loans, low cost loans, providing liquidity, making it easier for businesses to get the resources that they need because they're hanging on with their fingernails. And so, the CARES Act provided lots of money for small businesses, but it probably wasn't enough. It didn't last long enough. There were probably too loose of let's say, criteria about how it is that you should spend the money. So I know that some businesses said, we're just going to look at this as a long-term, really low-cost loan, and they didn't rehire the people. We're going to take this seriously, and we're going to rehire our workers. So I believe that there should be a new stimulus package, and it looks like Nancy Pelosi and Steve Mnuchin are negotiating something. It should include additional stimulus money, SBA money for small businesses. It should have some criteria attached that say, we're going to give you money if you go back and rehire your workers, right? So let's go out there and get people back to work, not at 70%, but try to get to 100%, not at 80% their salary, but let's get them back up to full 100%. I mean, that's how you get the economy back working. So I think that stimulus needs to happen. I'm not convinced that these parties can agree that stimulus needs to happen. I think it does. I mean, I work with tons of small businesses. A lot of my students work for small businesses. My wife has a small business. I mean, it's super important. So just because I think the car manufacturing industry or the airlines are likely to get a stimulus doesn't mean that I think that that's the only group or the only industries that deserve a stimulus. I just think that they're the most likely to get it.
All right, Tom. So I think we're coming up towards the end of time here, but we've had a lot of good questions. I thought maybe I'd throw in just one last one because we've got a couple likes on it, so people are interested in this question. Just do you believe the notion of a coming wave of consumer defaults are a viable concern? Essentially, a second wave of corporate losses that were hidden by the stimulus moratoriums.
So consumer defaults versus or company defaults. So
yeah, they'd said like credit cards, mortgage, utilities. If those were concerned.
Mortgages, yes. So the defaults are they're gonna cascade in I think a very, very predictable way. So all of the mortgage forbearance was done in a very hodgepodge way. So based on the bank that you had 90 days, you might have been able to re-up for 90 days. And then depending on how the bank put things together, you either had to make a lump sum payment all at the end, or they would tack it on, or some other combination of things. So there was no single federal program that said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have mortgage forbearance, what have you. Okay. Same thing with rent forbearance, is that they said you couldn't evict anybody. And then now all of a sudden, now all the eviction moratoriums are done. And so some cities like Houston, it's just, they're just evicting people in mass. It's nuts. Okay. So I think that it's going to start catching up with people. So you've been kind of moving along, you're holding on to some of your payments. You've been able to move some money around, and then all of a sudden you find out that your 10% temporary pay cut has now been turned into a semi-permanent. It'll last the next year. Or by the way, instead of having a two household earner family unit, now one of the people in your household is helping your third grader learn English or long division. So I think that's going to change the nature of what households earn. That's going to turn into defaulting on something, car payments, mortgages for sure. People who own commercial real estate, let's say like multi-family residential units, they're in big trouble. So the evictions are happening. You're not going to get your money from these people who have been evicted. Who are you going to get to fill in your apartment? people who don't have a job, people who don't have an income. I mean, you're going to have like tons of vacancies, and you can't find any way to make good on all of those lost rent payments. And so then at some point, the bank is going to say, well, I mean, you owe us this much money. You haven't been paying your mortgage for the last 6 months. Now it's due. So renegotiate with the bank, or do you just drop off the keys and say, screw it? Like, I just can't make this happen. As soon as that happens, and you get either a bunch of mortgages where people are defaulting on, or in terms of commercial or multi-residential units, now banks are left holding all of this distressed property on their balance sheets, and now you've got a redux of 2008, where banks have and you're going to get either the Treasury or the Fed in buying real estate from banks to clear the garbage off of the balance sheet of banks. So, I mean, once that happens, then you could see people defaulting on car loans, defaulting on other things. One of the trends that we have seen is that savings rates are actually going up, and people are trying to pay off their consumer debt as it stands. So a fair number of people, but I think this is the upward part of the K, have looked at, let's say, their overall spending patterns and said, I think that there's things that I can do with that. In a moment of shameless self-promotion, that's one of the things that I work on in my finance workshop that's starting tomorrow, is helping people think about how it is that they're spending money and come up with a money spending plan so that they can shore up their own personal financial position. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Tom, and our audience for joining us today for Business Over Breakfast. I think we are out of time. So many of you have joined us each and every Thursday and have offered great insights and questions, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to spend the morning with us. As always, a recording of today's session will be available on the Emory Education LinkedIn page, and you can find that link in the chat as well. Next Thursday, Steve Shepard will be joining us for Business Over Breakfast with Beyond Zoom, Embracing New Technologies in Business. So Zoom has become a favorite for many of us, but there are a lot of other things we can be leveraging right now and in the future. We hope you'll be able to join us again. If you want more of Tom, he'll be leading 2 of our short courses before the end of the calendar year. Tomorrow, October 2nd, he's kicking off the Personal Finance Workshop, and then we'll lead Finance and Accounting for Non-Financial Managers starting December 7th. We also have additional short courses available, as you can see here. Please visit our website if you'd like any more information on any of these upcoming sessions or to register. We'll have a brief survey pop up on your screen here in a second to get your feedback on today's session. Your feedback is valuable to us, and it only takes 1 to 2 minutes to complete. With that, Tom, I will turn it back over to you for any closing remarks.
No, I would say that, I typically get some people who reach out to me at tom.smith@emory.edu. They're curious about my thoughts on these things. They want to know, like what are my forecasts for different things. I really appreciate that people are curious about this topic. Economics is so challenging and so difficult. And I want you to understand that I am interested in what you have to say and what you're thinking about, and also how you think the economy is impacting you. The truth is that I talk to a lot of people trying to understand how this particular recession is impacting their lives. And if you have a comment, or you want to talk about something or whatever else, I'm not living in an ivory tower. I'm just a normal, regular dude. So you want to talk, you have an idea, you have a comment or whatever else, and reach out to me. I'm really interested in hearing other opinions and other point of view. So tom.smith@emory.edu. Send me an email if you'd like to.